theatre, film, TV and more. Suzy Wrong reviews it all on Joy Drive with Em and Warren.
Hey, Suzy Wrong, welcome back.
Thank you, Warren. I hope you and Em and all our listeners treated themselves to a wonderful long weekend, showed themselves lots of self-care and self-love, which is what I'm thinking about after watching today's program.
How did you were down in Melbourne for the Easter weekend. Did you have a nice time?
I had a great time. It was my first time sort of traveling since COVID, so it was pretty special.
The airports were packed, weren't they?
The airports were packed, which made me get a little bit terrified. So I got there really early. So there was a lot of sitting around at airports for hours and hours. But it was all worth it in the end.
You know what I did, Suzy? Just quickly, I drank all my water, my coffee, had all my snacks before I walked in. Then I put my mask on. And, of course, with the delays, I think I didn't remove my mask. I was too nervous to for the whole time. I think it was on for about 7 hours. In total, I was like a dehydrated prune by the time I got up to Queensland.
Yeah, because I haven't been going out very much in Sydney this whole time. So obviously when you're on holidays, you're not hiding in the hotel. So there were lots of hours out there with a mask on. And, I'm one of those people that will wear a mask as long as I'm not eating. So I've been walking around the amazing gallery and all the shops and everything with a mask on. So those were 4 long days with a lot of masking. But I'm glad I tested negative on my rat this morning. So that's good news.
Yes, absolutely. That's great news. A holiday and not an unwanted surprise. So we love that.
No positive rate.
Now, we did spend some of our long weekend watching our homework this week, Suzy. ROTHANIEL, can you tell us about it?
Stand-up comedian JERROD Carmichael's new HBO special, now available on Binge, is about secrets. He starts the hour by inviting his New York audience to feel free to talk back at him so that they can feel like a family inside the club, so that 35-year-old can finally have the courage to reveal the truth about himself. JERROD Carmichael is an African-American gay man, but has kept himself in the closet for all 15 years of his career up until now. In the special titled ROTHANIEL, we watch Carmichael coming out in real time and the interactions between comedian and audience as they involve themselves in the process of acceptance, with Carmichael becoming increasingly vulnerable on the stage. This is not a portrait of a queer person who has it all figured out. He confesses to being worried for his career, the difficulty in negotiating Christianity, and his loving but religious mother. There is a lot of melancholy in the show, which is always an unexpected quality to encounter in a stand-up, but I found the experience completely mesmerizing. Carmichael's performance is disarmingly truthful. It often feels unscripted, as though we are watching a person bring to words the deepest parts of his being and the purest parts of his soul. He lets himself fall into silence, allowing audience members to ask questions so that he can respond with a transparency that reveals a state of discombobulation he no longer wants to disguise. It is a triumph of truth over certainty, of letting go of everything that prevents one from being true to oneself. As queer people, we recognize the immense discomfort Carmichael displays, but we also understand the glorious freedom that is sure to come in the days after. Em and Warren is a really unusual thing to watch, isn't it?
It definitely is. I've got to say, though, as soon as I pressed play to watch it, I loved the opening part with the snow falling in New York outside the Blue Note Jazz Club. I found that really mesmerising, to be honest, before we even got into the performance.
It was a beautiful start. Yeah, absolutely.
The tone was fantastic, the way they set it up so that you're not sort of gearing yourself up for a big laugh fest, which it isn't, strangely enough.
I think that's the thing about this special. Like, I love it. I think it's fantastic. I think it's important. I think it's one to watch for sure. I think that you just need to go into it with the right frame of mind, because it's not, there are a few chuckle moments. There's a live audience, so they, there are moments where they erupt into laughter, but majority of this special is not necessarily comedy. He finds himself trying to go back to the trope of being a comedian and finding the jokes and stuff, but really what he's doing is kind of having this self-exploration, this, want of self-acceptance, and also, of course, acceptance from those around him as well. And I think if you go into it with the right frame of mind, then it's fantastic. But you need to know that you're not getting... Firstly, it's not a stand-up special because he's sitting down the whole time. So that's not stand-up, firstly.
And his body language is quite... you can see that he's uncomfortable when he's talking, though. But I agree with you, Em. I found it was... it's emotionally raw, but it's more conversational, I think, than, a typical stand-up comedy that I've experienced. And there's something kind of... I don't know, sort of melancholy about it as well, isn't there?
Yeah,
as he's
it's
talking.
a lot like Hannah Gadsby's Nanette
Yeah.
from several years ago, which was a massive hit, where you're not necessarily in there laughing all the time, but listening to some really intriguing and really important things. So I want to ask Em, like you've had, a lot of experience on stage doing similar sort of stand-up work, I guess, in that genre. What do you think, like, in terms of categories, in terms of definition, how far do you feel you can sort of expand on the definition of stand-up comedy?
I think that as a genre and as an art form, it has certainly over even the years that I've been doing it, 7 years in my experience, it has certainly morphed into something more than just stand up and tell joke after joke after joke. There used to be when I started this thing where it's like you need to have certain amount of jokes per minute. It's basically just joke, joke, joke and nothing but, and that's stand up. But I think over the course of time, things like Nanette came out, and we are now finding comedy that has light and shade as well, that I think is allowed. I mean, there's no body overseeing comedy that says, okay, well, it needs to be this way or it needs to be that way. So I think that there is this extension now where comedy has, a story arc or something unfolds that isn't particularly humorous, but it's enlightening or engaging or connects with the audience. And there's the magic of that,
Do you think, Em, that the comedy is finding its own sort of feet in some ways? Like there has been predefined formulas on how to do it, and now people are starting to break out and go, well, actually, you know what, that's tried and tested, but I want to do something completely different now to what is the standard formula.
100%. I think that is totally what's happening, but also it's kind of almost flipping. So now it's kind of like you go to a regular stand-up show that's just jokes, 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 and people are like, huh? I don't want that. I want something that, makes me feel stuff, and I want to be able to laugh and cry. And so I think that's like now the new thing. This is a very good example of that. Comedy that has that, ability to make you feel but also laugh. And that's the new thing to do in comedy.
I love that in the show he talks about, secrets that people know but they don't talk about in the room. And I think, Suzy and Em, that's something that we all go through, isn't it? And I think he uses the analogy, he says, for example, we're all a product of our parents' sex, aren't we? But we don't talk about it. We never talk about it. But also, growing up as part of the LGBTIQA plus community, I mean, a lot of us had family members who all know, but no one talks about it. It's like the big elephant in the room and no one talks about it. And he integrated that into his comedy show, which I thought was brilliant.
Yeah, it's a really big part of this sort of, what I consider culture making, which is Rothaniel as a special is an important part of culture. I think a lot of why we don't talk about things that we know is often a lack of language. We don't kind of know how do we discuss these things without making everyone really uncomfortable or making things too overly emotional or, knowing that it's not going to have a quick, easy resolution. So we sort of always pretend that it doesn't exist. But I think a lot of it has to do with a language issue of how do we talk about these things and not having sort of points of reference for it. And so a thing like that, Rothaniel, it sort of gives a new point of reference, especially I think for people of color. I think in most cases, people of color have a different experience of coming out. And in a way, this is quite groundbreaking to see a black man coming out at 35, in sort of a public way and then discussing the parents and his family. I think it's necessary, and hopefully it helps people of minority cultures.
Absolutely. We're chatting with Suzy Wrong about Rothaniel, which is Gerard Carmichael's special, which is streaming on Binge. Now, Suzy, one of the things that I loved the most about this is, as a comedian, as you mentioned myself, you don't want to be heckled. Heckling is something that, you're going to have to deal with, and you want to be the funnier one in the situation usually, and you want to be able to, retort, rebut, and have a sort of wit about you when it comes to heckling. But this show has a totally different approach, and it's not even heckling, it's a conversation. And I think the audience's questions were so thoughtful and considered and really quite intellectual, and the way that Gerard responded was just really quite magical. Seeing this actual exchange of audience and performer was really, really quite magical.
I agree with you.
Yeah, there was amazing tenderness there from his audience, which was important for people to see, that when you come out, you don't only get aggression, you don't only get pushback, you will get people that care for you and who will prompt you to question important things that you might not have thought about. And his answers were great, you know. I think at those moments he sort of puts the comedy aside and sort of answers from a really truthful place. And in fact, I found those bits much more engaging than when he tries to deliver the punchlines.
And, I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but I do love the way that he explains how the name Rothaniel comes about as well.
Yeah. Well, that actually is the punchline.
That is, isn't it? So let's not spoil it.
Yeah, let's not spoil it.
Suzy, what is our homework for next week?
Heartstopper is a new series coming to Netflix this weekend with teenage boys Charlie and Nick discovering that their unlikely friendship might be something more as they navigate school and young love. That's Heartstopper on Netflix.
Is it a movie or a series, Suzy?
It's a series.
Okay.
Like last week, it's for younger audiences, so that'll be interesting for us.
Fantastic. So Heartstopper on Netflix.
That's right.
When will we see you next?
Thank you so much. I'll see you next Tuesday.
Thanks, Suzy.
See you, Suzy.